What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 12 Thanksgiving games. Final look.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
Okay guys, in this video, I'm going to give you my top DFS picks for the 3-game Thursday Thanksgiving slate.
And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Oh, and good news guys, make sure to stay tuned to the very end of this video because we removed the box that was popping up and blocking the lineup. So now you can see a full lineup using these picks that we made in this video if you stay to the very end. Okay guys, let's take a look at this 3-game Thanksgiving slate. So at the quarterback position, the top quarterback on the slate is Josh Allen from the Buffalo Bills playing the New Orleans Saints, who have a pretty good defense overall, but they give up the 10th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Josh Allen has averaged 25.4 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6.1 rush attempts per game. He's going to be about 33% owned, projected at 22.7 fantasy points here on Thanksgiving Day, and he's 7,800 DraftKings salary and 1,000 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 45.5 points scored in this game, and they have the Buffalo Bills favored by 6. Josh Allen has scored 18, 25, and 13 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I think he's a quarterback that's worth paying up for in this one. I like Josh Allen here versus the New Orleans Saints. Okay, another quarterback that I like is Dak Prescott from the Dallas Cowboys playing the Las Vegas Raiders, who have the 9th worst defense overall, and they're middle of the pack defending opposing quarterbacks. Dak Prescott has averaged 21.9 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 2.9 rush attempts per game. He's going to be about 28% owned, projected at 20.7 fantasy points here on Thanksgiving Day, and he's 6,900 DraftKings salary, 1,300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 50.5 points scored in this game, with the Dallas Cowboys favored by 7.5. So you got a pretty decent matchup here, and I like this pick because you're saving some salary coming down off of Josh Allen, and you're getting Dak Prescott in what should be a high-scoring game, and I hope the Raiders can keep this competitive within a touchdown to put the pressure on Dak to continue to pass the ball. And Dak Prescott has scored 6, 26, and 20 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I also like that it's going to be a bounce-back game for Dak Prescott. I do think he bounces back in this one. So I like Dak Prescott here versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Okay, now you could make a case for Derek Carr from the Las Vegas Raiders because he's only 5,900 DraftKings salary. He's 1,500 more on FanDuel, and he's averaged 19.5 fantasy points per game on the season. He's going to be about 19% owned, projected at 18.1 fantasy points here on Thanksgiving Day, and he's 5,900 DraftKings salary, 1,500 more on FanDuel. And with Vegas thinking that the Raiders are going to be behind or trailing by 7.5, could be a lot of pressure on Derek Carr to pass the ball throughout this game. And you can get some nice stacks with Derek Carr, one of his wide receivers, or his tight end, Darren Waller. So I like the salary saving and the lower ownership on a guy who could put up 20 plus fantasy points in this one. So I think you can make the case for Derek Carr here versus the Dallas Cowboys.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching.
If you want to enter the drawing for $25 PayPal,
All you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won.
And we'll send you $25 PayPal.
So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. The stud on the slate is Ezekiel Elliott from the Dallas Cowboys, playing the Las Vegas Raiders, who have the 9th worst defense overall, and they give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Ezekiel Elliott has averaged 17.9 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 15.1 rush attempts per game and 3.8 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 36% owned, on the field for 68% of the snaps, and he's projected at 17.2 fantasy points here on Thanksgiving Day, and he's 8,000 DraftKings salary, 400 more on FanDuel, and we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 50.5 points scored in this game, so it is the highest scoring game on the slate, and with Dallas Cowboys favored by 7.5, there's a chance that they get ahead by 2 touchdowns here, and Ezekiel Elliott sees a ton of rush attempts. So great matchup, just good pick all around here. Definitely the stud on the slate. So I like Ezekiel Elliott here versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Now my favorite running back play of the day is David Montgomery from the Chicago Bears, playing the Detroit Lions, who have the 4th worst defense overall, and they give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing running backs. David Montgomery has averaged 13.9 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 16 rush attempts per game and 2 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 43% owned, on the field for 100% of the snaps, touches the ball 39% of that time, and he's projected at 17.5 fantasy points here on Thanksgiving Day. And I like this pick because David Montgomery is only 6,000 DraftKings salary. He's 1,500 more on FanDuel, so I love that DraftKings price. Vegas thinks there's going to be 41.5 points scored in this game, with the Chicago Bears favored by 3. So a fantastic matchup, and David Montgomery has scored 8, 10, and 26 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 14, 13, and 23 rush attempts. So he could get close to 20 touches in this one in a great matchup. I think he's going to run all over the Detroit Lions at only 6,000 DraftKings salary. Going to be hard to get away from this play. So I like David Montgomery here versus the Detroit Lions. Okay, now another running back that I like on this slate is Josh Jacobs from the Las Vegas Raiders, playing the Dallas Cowboys, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They've been pretty good versus opposing running backs, and Josh Jacobs has averaged 13.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 11.1 rush attempts per game and 4 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 27% owned, projected at 13.6 fantasy points here on Thanksgiving Day, and he's 5,900 DraftKings salary and 800 more on FanDuel. Now, Josh Jacobs has scored 11, 9, and 14 fantasy points in his last 3 games off of 9, 7, and 13 rush attempts. But the reason I like this pick is because he's been increasingly involved in the passing game the last 3 weeks, getting 7, 5, and 4 pass targets. So he got 7 pass targets last game. That is encouraging, especially if the Las Vegas Raiders fall behind in this game. If Josh Jacobs can get 5 to 7 pass targets on top of, let's say, 12 to 15 rush attempts, that'll be pretty decent volume for a guy that's 5,900 DraftKings salary. Now, I do prefer David Montgomery over Josh Jacobs, but in the case David Montgomery doesn't perform, or if you just want to go for it and save a ton of salary at the running back position and stack Josh Jacobs and David Montgomery, then that's a pretty good strategy as well. So I like Josh Jacobs here versus the Dallas Cowboys. Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. So the wide receiver stud on the slate is Stefon Diggs from the Buffalo Bills playing the New Orleans Saints, who have a good defense overall, but they give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Stefon Diggs has averaged 17.9 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 9.3 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 80% of the snaps. He's going to be about 40% owned, projected at 17.5 fantasy points here on Thanksgiving Day. He's $7,900 DraftKings salary and $400 more on FanDuel. So we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 45.5 points scored in this game, with the Bills favored by 6, and Stefon Diggs has scored 18, 33, and 15 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 6, 13, and 8 pass targets. So tons of volume, tons of production. This guy's got the biggest ceiling of anybody on the slate. So I like Stefon Diggs here versus the New Orleans Saints. Okay, now coming down in salary, I like Michael Gallup from the Dallas Cowboys playing the Las Vegas Raiders, who have the 11th worst defense overall. The 9th worst defense overall. They've been pretty good versus opposing wide receivers. Michael Gallup has averaged 8.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 7.3 pass targets per game. He's projected at 13.6 fantasy points here on Thanksgiving Day. He's $5,900 DraftKings salary, $600 more on FanDuel. He's going to be about 34% owned. So Michael Gallup has scored 9, 7, and 8 fantasy points in the last 3 games, but he got 10, 5, and 7 pass targets. So that's a lot of volume. So I like Michael Gallup here versus the Las Vegas Raiders.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. Our NBA tools are awesome. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, now it looks like Allen Robinson is going to be out, so that opens up a big play with Darnell Mooney from the Chicago Bears playing the Detroit Lions, who have the 4th worst defense overall. They're middle of the pack defending opposing wide receivers. Darnell Mooney has averaged 13.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 7.5 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 86% of the snaps, only going to be about 22% owned, projected at 14.1 fantasy points here on Thanksgiving Day. And he's only $5,700 DraftKings salary, $1,100 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 41.5 points scored in this game, with the Bears favored by 3. Now, this play stands out to me because of no Allen Robinson, and Darnell Mooney has scored 26, 21, and 12 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 16, 6, and 9 pass targets. So monster volume last game, and I think that might continue here this week or here into Thanksgiving Day. So I like Darnell Mooney here versus the Detroit Lions. Okay, now if you want to save some salary at the wide receiver position, I got a couple of value plays for you. The first one is Cole Beasley from the Buffalo Bills playing the New Orleans Saints, who have a good defense overall. They give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Cole Beasley has averaged 11.4 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 7.4 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 25% owned, projected at 11.6 fantasy points here on Thanksgiving Day. And he's 4,500 DraftKings salary and 1,200 more on FanDuel. So Cole Beasley has scored 6, 4, and 11 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 5, 2, and 11 pass targets, but he was a little banged up for the past 2 or 3 games. The 2 games before those, he scored 24 and 22 fantasy points, so he was on fire before he got that injury. Now, I think he is back to full strength here, and his salary's pretty low, so I think that makes him a good value play on the slate with pretty big upside. So I like Cole Beasley here versus the New Orleans Saints. Okay, another value play at the wide receiver position is Traequan Smith from the New Orleans Saints playing the Buffalo Bills, who have a good defense overall. They've been good versus opposing wide receivers, but Traequan Smith has averaged 9.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 100% of the snaps. He's going to be about 20% owned, projected at 9.7 fantasy points here on Thanksgiving Day. And he's 4,400 DraftKings salary and 1,500 more on FanDuel. So Traequan Smith has scored 11, 14, and 8 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 8, 7, and 4 pass targets. So pretty decent volume the past couple of games. So I like Traequan Smith here versus the Buffalo Bills. Oh, and just before I move on, if you do want a super low salary value play and a guy who's going to get a handful of targets, take a look at Cedric Wilson from the Dallas Cowboys. He got 7 pass targets last game, put up 8 fantasy points. He's going to be about 22% owned, and he's only 3,500 DraftKings salary, 2,100 more on FanDuel, projected at 9 fantasy points. So if you're looking for that deep sleeper pick or that super value play so you can stack the studs at the other positions, take a look at Cedric Wilson here versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. The tight end stud on the slate is Darren Waller from the Las Vegas Raiders playing the Dallas Cowboys, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Darren Waller has averaged 14.4 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8.8 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 90% of the snaps. He's going to be about 39% owned, projected at 15.4 fantasy points here on Thanksgiving Day. He's 6,400 DraftKings salary, 900 more on FanDuel. So I like that he's playing in this high-scoring game here. 50.5 points projected in this game, with the Raiders trailing by 7.5. So could be a passing game script and a good tight end matchup. Darren Waller has scored 22, 6, and 16 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 8, 7, and 11 pass targets. So I like Darren Waller here versus the Dallas Cowboys. Okay, another tight end that I like is Dalton Schultz from the Dallas Cowboys. And the Las Vegas Raiders, we know, have the 9th worst defense overall. They give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Dalton Schultz has averaged 11.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.9 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 78% of the snaps, going to be about 28% owned, projected at 12.2 fantasy points here on Thanksgiving Day. He's 5,300 DraftKings salary, 700 more on FanDuel. So great matchup here. And Dalton Schultz scored 11 fantasy points last game off of 8 pass targets. So it looks like the volume is there in a good matchup in a high-scoring game. So I like Dalton Schultz here versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Okay, now this is my standout play. I don't know why I'm feeling this, but I just think his ownership is a little bit too low. I like TJ Hockenson from the Detroit Lions playing the Chicago Bears, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They've been pretty good versus opposing tight ends. TJ Hockenson has averaged 11.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 7.2 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 84% of the snaps. He's only going to be about 15% owned on a 3-game slate. That ownership just looks way too low for me. He's projected at 11.7 fantasy points here on Thanksgiving Day. He's 5,200 DraftKings salary, 900 more on FanDuel. He scored 11, 0, and 19 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 8, 1, and 11 pass targets. So I know that donut really sticks out where he only got 1 pass target, probably ruined everybody's lineup that played him, or definitely ruined everyone's lineup that played him. But outside of that 1 game, really hasn't been bad this season. He's been pretty good this season. And 8 pass targets last game. I expect him to get 8 to 10 pass targets. His salary's reasonable at $5,200, but what sticks out to me is this low ownership on a 3-game slate of only 15% owned. I just think he's a good player to hedge your lineups against the field, because if TJ Hockenson goes off and scores 2 touchdowns, you've just jumped ahead of pretty much everyone else in the contest. So I think this is a pretty interesting play here. Now, maybe not a cash game play, but for tournaments, he is my favorite tournament player on this slate. So I like TJ Hockenson here versus the Chicago Bears. Okay, now one other tight end that I'm looking at here is Dawson Knox from the Buffalo Bills playing the New Orleans Saints, who have a good defense overall. They've been good versus opposing tight ends. Dawson Knox has averaged 12.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 4.8 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 80% of the snaps, going to be about 18% owned, projected at 10.1 fantasy points here on Thanksgiving Day. And he's only 4,400 DraftKings salary. Now he's 1,500 more on FanDuel. But Dawson Knox scored 14 fantasy points last game off of 10 pass targets. Now the game before that, he only scored 3 fantasy points off of 1 pass target. So definitely some risk here with Dawson Knox, but you are going to save a bunch of salary. Ownership still pretty low. See, that's why TJ Hockenson at only 15%, lower ownership than Dawson Knox, but I guess that makes sense. Dawson Knox, you're saving a bunch of salary at only 4,400 DraftKings salary. So I like Dawson Knox here versus the New Orleans Saints.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NFL slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again and good luck.